Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about the sneaky ways that tell us that we think our brain is in some way broken and need to be fixed. Now, for sure, there's some ways where you're like, no, there's, stuff that goes on. And it definitely is not working for me. But sometimes we can think, like, I know I certainly am like, oh, yeah, I'm kind of over the fact that I have ADHD. It's like, not my first choice every moment of every day. But most of the time, I'm like, actually, it helps me a lot. And I've learned to live with it. And I've created a life that aligns with my ADHD. So I bump into problems less often because my life is just is set up in a way that I can live with greater ease with the way my brain is. But I was taken aback this week when the last couple weeks, I've just been having a harder time getting out of bed. I'm like a little more sleepy in the morning. And some of it, I think I was getting sick. And, some of it certainly is kitty snuggles in the morning because my cat Brielle loves to snuggle in bed in the morning. It's like, oh dear, like you're not making this easy on me, sister. But some of it, I noticed some messages in my head around, you have to get all this stuff done. You have to get up. You have to get it done. And I got really curious about it and I did some writing about it and tried to figure out what was beneath that. And, I'd be interested, like, share in the comments if this is you. But the messages I heard in my head is you're never going to get it done. If you don't do it, no one else will. You might look like you're lazy or you don't care. The people you work with are going to think you're a mess. All this stuff, right? And there were just these messages around being not good enough because I needed to rest. Now, to be fair, I think a lot of people, especially women, feel this now because we're in a society that doesn't prioritize rest. In fact, we're supposed to just do it and get stuff done all the time. So it makes sense that so many of us, even if you don't have ADHD and you're listening, would be like, well, I have a hard time resting. I feel like crap when I rest. I mean, you don't actually feel like crap when you rest. You feel better, but you feel guilty inside, right? Emotionally, you might feel bad about yourself or bad that you're taking a break. Because it's true, people in society are like, oh, must be nice, taking a nap on a Thursday. Like, you know what I mean? And so there's certainly that societal aspect. But so many of us with ADHD grew up with a whole extra layer around that because it was tied to our very character in a way that maybe it isn't with others. It's like, well, you can focus on this, but you can't focus on that. Or people correcting us, or just like, the sheer fact that sometimes things take longer because we get distracted, right? Although it's hard to say, like, we might actually be just as productive as people who are neurotypical. It's just that we do lots of things all at the same time. So I don't know it might be kind of fun. I mean, I don't know, it might be stressful, but to be like, okay, here's all the tasks, right? That both people need to do. And let's just see what happens. And I suspect, even though it might look more linear for someone who doesn't have ADHD, if you get distracted by cleaning your bathroom, and that's one of the things on the list, then that's great. But if you're distracted by researching Iceland, that might be a different problem, right? Like, it might make you not as productive. So, I don't want to absolutely say that things take us longer, but it can seem like that because of our ability to get distracted. So that can be a huge factor. So then we feel like we have to work harder just to keep up, right? So that we're not behind, or we're, I don't know what we think we're behind on as adults, but it happens. But another piece of this is we end up with a lot more on our plates than people because we have a hard time saying no. And I've talked about this before. We have a hard time saying no for a few reasons. One of the ways, at least I know me, that I got people to, I don't want to say hate me less, but be less annoyed with me is I would be a people pleaser and agreed to do stuff for them and agree to help them. Because then, like, okay, as long as I'm helping them with all this stuff And then I have, a moment, which I didn't know was ADHD when this pattern started. Then they're a little more forgiving because of how helpful I've been, right? I don't know if anyone else has been like that. I don't think I thought it through that to that degree because I was a child, but it was like more subconscious of figuring that out, that like, oh, if I make people happy and do stuff for them, then they will appreciate me and give me some grace when things don't go as they would like them to go, just with how my brain functions and sometimes how I do things, right? So I don't know if that's you. That can certainly be a reason we end up taking on more stuff. One reason we end up taking on more stuff is time blindness. So sometimes we're like, oh, yeah, sure, I could totally help with that. We think it's going to take like a half an hour. And 8 hours later, we're like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Right? And so then our plates can be extra full. So slowing down and resting can feel really challenging to do because we've got all this extra stuff over and above our own stuff. And we don't want to be that person who goes back and goes, gosh, you know what? I took on more than I could handle. I need to pass this back to you because we already carry so much. I mean, this could be the reason why I've noticed that a lot of us carry so much shame around not following through on things and that messaging, that for us to not finish something someone else has asked of us, it's just like do or die, right? I mean, maybe that's what I notice in my experience, both personally and professionally. So it makes sense that we end up struggling to rest and to slow down. It's just that also, it seems to me that there's an underlying message that was coming up in my head around brokenness. And I've done a lot of therapy over the years for 25, we're getting close to 30 years here of therapy. That ages me a little bit. But anyway, probably so does the podcast episode, 50 Things I've Lived in 50 Years. So there's that. But anyway, I've done a lot of work and I really love myself. I accept myself. I can, have a sense of humor when I do things that don't work out and I can be really amused by myself sometimes. Like, I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, Jen, like today I started the beginning of this podcast over 5 times, like legitimately 5 times. It's like, okay, great. It's just something that happens. So as someone who, generally loves and accepts myself and recognizes ADHD is just part of how I function, even before I knew it was ADHD, it surprised me that some of the messages around rest were like, about ADHD and about not functioning as well or needing to work harder to prove myself or something. It was weird. I was like, where is this coming from? So I clearly have parts of me with some of this stuff that's unresolved. And so that's what I want to talk about today, because there's sneaky ways that we have beliefs or parts of us that believe we're not good enough because of our ADHD. Even if most of us, like most of the parts of us are like, no, I think I'm awesome. I mean, I do pretty good, or at least we're like, well, I'm not terrible, like maybe you don't think you're awesome yet, but wherever you're at with it. And so I want to honor that we can have different parts who feel different ways and different things about the exact same thing. You can have a part of you that's like, yeah, your ADHD kind of makes you a piece of crap. And you can have parts of you who are like, you're beautiful, your brain is awesome, look at all the strengths that it brings you. It can be hard sometimes, but you got this, sister, right? And then anywhere in between, right? And so I want to honor that you'll have those multiple things going on at the same time. It's just that sometimes, depending on how much work we've done, the parts that are louder, well, I mean, it depends, might be the things that are like, you're doing great or having a sense of humor or whatever, when in reality, there's still some parts underneath that really don't think you're all that great or make you not feel good about yourself. And I want to remind everyone, all of our parts are welcome. They all have value. All of our parts are just trying to help us. And if you're like, okay, how could a part that thinks I'm a piece of crap be like helping me? And in my experience, and everybody's system is different, but in my experience, what I notice when people have that is that part is like trying to keep you together so that you kind of you either beat people to the punch by doing it right and they can't criticize you, or you criticize yourself first, so then it doesn't hurt as much when they do, right? Or they might not even, if you criticize yourself aloud, they might avoid the criticism because now you've already beat yourself up and they're like, well, I'm not going to, make it worse. And, she's already sorry or whatever. So all of our parts are trying to help us. It's just that some of this, the shaming, the criticism, that internal critic is not particularly productive or effective in our lives today. Especially, you're starting a business or growing a business, building a business in some way. And doing that requires an enormous amount of courage and putting yourself out there. And there's a need to be able to hold yourself with compassion and, not see things that don't go well as personality or character flaws and all that. And so if you have a part who's sitting there, waiting for you to mess up or something, or what it thinks is messing up, and it wants to be like, you suck, that's not particularly productive for this stage of your life, even if there was a time when it kept you safe. So I want to honor that all of our parts are welcome. And I want to name how I see this show up for many women, especially women, who are interested in my program or ask questions. And one of the things, and I don't just see this unique to me, clients do this when they come into therapy, and it's not just me that experiences this. My colleagues experience this. I certainly experience with my program Ascend when people are asking questions. What I hear a lot is, how long is this going to take? As though like you're broken, and once we do the right things, you shall be fixed, right? That's one of those sneaky ways that like our parts who maybe haven't accepted our ADHD are popping up. And you might be like, well, it's valid to wonder how long something is going to take. And I'm not saying it's not. Like we do want to know, but it's like, take to do what? How long is it going to take to do what? To find happiness? Because you could be happiness, right? You could be happiness. You could be happy right in this moment. You could choose joy right in this moment. I enjoy doing my podcast, so this is joyful for me, but I could also choose to look outside and there's trees out there and I could find birds, which I'm fighting the earth not to do, right? But we can find joy in any moment, even when stuff is hard. And that's a rabbit hole right there. I mean, Viktor Frankl wrote a book about it. There was another book I read that a woman she was kidnapped by Somali pirates and kept in a dark room, except when they fed her, so she could only see the light, like the sunlight, like that little bit every day when they would feed her. And so she learned to be grateful and find joy in that. And I'm not saying like, yes, you suffered abuse, you should be joyful. Like, I want to be clear, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying, like, you could choose joy at any time. It might be hard for some or harder based on what you've been through. So if that's what you're wanting, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's not it. What is it that you want? And when we get to the bottom of it, what I hear is the second point is that for their ADHD not to be a problem. Which is fair, right? We don't want our ADHD to be a problem. But inherent in that message is for you to function like someone who doesn't have ADHD. A lot of times, not always. But the thing is like, if you have ADHD, you're never going to function the way someone without ADHD does. And that's actually not bad. It's just different. And our society has such a hard time with difference. And maybe you even got teased for it growing up. So it's like, I don't want to be different. I just want to be the same. I want to blend in. But it's not bad to be different. And actually, some of your differences with ADHD can be strengths. Like certainly difficulty focusing is not fantastic, right? I'm not saying that's a strength. I'm not trying to be like, ADHD is the superpower. But that doesn't mean it doesn't come with extra benefits, especially if you're an entrepreneur. Your creativity alone, most of us with ADHD have enormous amounts of creativity that when we're regulated in our nervous system, we can access. And it's like, whoa, we can come up with some really amazing good stuff. We're engaging. People can be attracted to us because We're charismatic and engaging. And so people like that energy that we put off. We also are we're less averse to risk. We're willing to take risks. I actually think this is because, like, like, humor me for a second. I actually think some of our risk taking comes from the fact that we're like, I mean, I've seen shit hit the fan and I've handled it before. So, like, all right, you're like, I can handle stuff to some degree. So some of it could be that. There could be also just inherent in our ADHD brains. But to recognize that, like, your brain will never function like someone who doesn't have ADHD. I shouldn't say never. I don't really like always and never, but it's unlikely unless there's some magical tool. What's more likely is that you can create a life that will, and a business that will work for you with your ADHD brain, which is what I've done and which is what I help women do, is so that we are, instead of shaming ourselves for our ADHD, instead of always bumping into our ADHD and seeing it as a problem, we're like, oh, yeah, okay, that's just how my brain works. I'm just going to do it this way, versus like the icky stuff. So another way that this shows up that can be sneaky is when people are wanting help, whether in therapy or in a program, is asking like, okay, well, will this help me be less scattered and distracted, more organized, and more productive, all that stuff. And that's fair. Like, obviously, if people are coming into like my Ascend program, for example, or they're coming into therapy, obviously people want to know that they're going to get results. But inherent in that, will it help me be less scattered? Will it help me be less distracted? Will it help me be more productive? Is like that you're not doing any of those things. There's no recognition that you have moments where maybe you are able to focus, you are organized, and you are productive. Because ADHD isn't really a deficit, it's more of an inconsistency. It's more of a consistency issue. And so that can be another sneaky way where we just see our dysfunction. We see the ways we don't work. And I get it. Like, believe me, I feel you. So much of our world, including the DSM, right? The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that has all the mental health diagnoses. And in order for your insurance to even pay for you to be seen, you have to have a diagnosis. You can't, your insurance won't pay for therapy unless you have a diagnosis and it's medically necessary, because that's what it's medical insurance is. So, but the problem is you have to look unwell to get a diagnosis, which is all about pathologizing. And I just, that's just even inherent in our mental health system, let alone with, I know someone I know, probably can't say who it is even if I did know, but someone I know is noticing some challenges that their child is having with either autism or ADHD, something like that. But child is getting A's in school. So the school's like, no, they're doing well enough. Even though to get those A's, that child outside of school is like only doing schoolwork and is getting burned out and struggling. If they stopped doing all the strategies, they'd fall apart. This might sound familiar to some of us who hyper-functioned to make it through. I know that's my story, certainly. And so like, we have to be unwell enough or sick enough or look broken enough to be able to get help. And that's why a lot of us focus so much on like, well, I can't do this and I can't do that because of my ADHD and I'm just so scattered. And we're so hyper-focused on the challenges we have. Not all of us. Like, I'm not trying to call anyone out here. But like, if you catch yourself doing that, I know I do it. When you catch yourself doing it, it's like, oh, wow, I am really focused on what I can't do. And that's fine. Like, we do want to notice what we're struggling with so we can pivot and do something to help us be more productive, more effective. But constantly focusing on that makes us feel broken. It makes us feel awful. And I don't know about you, but when I feel bad about myself, that doesn't make it easier to go get stuff done. It doesn't make it easier for me to show up and put more stuff on social media, risking negative comments. It doesn't, it doesn't motivate me to work on my business even. So much of this is like seeing how do we get out of this pathological model, this model of seeing our beautiful ADHD brains as broken. Because our brains aren't broken, they're just different. Sure, society can see difference as broken, but what if it's not? What if it's just different? There was a time when homosexuality, DSM-3, right? DSM-4, I believe, came out in 1980, or did DSM-3 come out in 1980? Now I'm forgetting. I think DSM-3 came out in 1980, and it had homosexuality as a diagnosis, like a mental health diagnosis, like as a pathology, which is like so not okay. And so it's like it pathologizes all of these differences. And sure, maybe some of the differences in there make it hard to function. Not homosexuality necessarily, except that society is unkind to people who are, LGBTQIA plus in that community. But, that not inherent in that functioning isn't necessarily harder, but it can be with things like depression or bipolar disorder or certainly schizophrenia. And it's valuable, or it can be valuable, to acknowledge the difficulties and the struggles so you don't just feel like a bad person that you can't do stuff. There can be value in that. But beyond that, if you stay stuck in feeling bad because you're different and feeling broken because you're different, it's just going to weigh you down and make it harder for you to do what you want to do in life and to really enjoy things. So I want to talk a little bit about how do we get out of this? How do we get out of it? And so, I'm a therapist, right? Even though in this business, I work with women with ADHD entrepreneurs. But I will tell you, the only way out is through. So those feelings that come up when you notice them, like this week when I was shaming myself about needing rest, I was like, all right, what's going on? So I sat down, I felt the feelings. I just sat with it for a while. I did some writing. I sat with it some more. And I'm still kind of working through the layers of it. And that is step one, is working through it. And with ADHD specifically, it might be some grief, right? You might have some like sadness, like this isn't what I wanted. I don't want to have to function differently. I just want to be like everyone else, right? That's grief, and that's valid. It's valid. And so you may need to, work through the layers of grief. And, to be clear, grief is more of a weaving, like in and out through it. It comes and goes, and we work through different layers. It's just that might be a valid step that you need if you have grief around the fact that you have ADHD or that you're ADHD adjacent, right? That you're struggling with symptoms congruent with ADHD, whatever language works for you. And so there may be some feelings to work through about that. It might be working through frustration or anger or, I don't know, shame even. There's stuff there. I also talk about the trauma of growing up ADHD in a society not designed for us. I talk about that a lot, so I'm not going to unpack that today. You can go back and look. I probably talk about it on almost every podcast. I just talked about it 2 weeks ago with Dr. Justice. So, but there can be trauma with all the criticism and complaint, and not even complaint, criticism and correction and negative commentary that we got growing up with ADHD. So a piece of this is working through that. Another bus stop along the way might be working on self-compassion. And sure, acceptance is a place too, but I kind of go back and forth on like, do we need to be in a place of acceptance before we can extend self-compassion, or do we need self-compassion first? And I don't know. I don't know that anyone knows, but I mean, you could play with it. But basically, self-compassion is seeing if something inside of yourself, maybe your highest self, maybe your self-energy, or maybe your day-to-day getting on with life parts are able to extend compassion, empathy, and, just generosity towards the parts of you that struggle, towards the struggles with ADHD. Instead of shaming, it's like, oh, That's really hard. I get how that's hard for you. And just being with that struggle and acknowledging it can be a step along the way, recognizing that you come by things honestly. There are times I've been having a really hard time this last week getting myself to focus. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like it is frustrating. And, being compassionate and be like, yeah, you know what? I get to be frustrated. Of course I'm frustrated. And B, focus, attention ebbs and flows. And this is just a time when it's not as great. And instead, I'm going to shift my attention towards getting more grounded and building my concentration, making sure I'm getting my exercise in consistently, my meditation, the supplements that I take, stuff like that, getting enough sleep, which it turned out I needed more rest than I thought, more sleep than I thought, because I've been fighting off getting sick. So anyway, so some of it is just having compassion for yourself and being generous. If you think about it, if you know a child, even if you don't have one, if a child is struggling, how motivated would they be if you beat them up and were like, well, yeah, but you just need to do it. Like, get over yourself. Like, first of all, I can't imagine people still saying that in this day and age, though I know what happens because I'm a therapist. But also, I cannot imagine that being terribly effective. I mean, it was what was told to most of us, and sure, we did stuff, but then we all ended up with like anxiety disorders and trauma. So like, great. Sure, it worked. Right. Maybe there's another way that can motivate people without having to, create anxiety problems and trauma and all that. So think about that. You wouldn't talk to a child like that. So how can you talk to your own self when you're struggling with a sense of self-compassion? Along this journey is acceptance. And some of it is acceptance of your ADHD just being like how your brain works. And I will tell you, one of the things, like we do a lot of things inside the program, inside Ascend, the program I work with ADHD women entrepreneurs. We do a lot of things. And I got to tell you, one of the things that I have found pivots people or shifts people the most is being able to accept that their ADHD is just part of who they are, and that they're not bad for it. And yeah, there's lots of things we do to get there, and there's other pieces that also help. But that big shift, it's huge. It will change the way that you approach things. It will change the way you live and work. So working towards acceptance is really, really important. And I think it might ebb and flow. Like there's times when you feel more accepting of like, oh yeah, it's just how my brain works. And then there's times where like, like this week with me with rest, I was like, God, why am I so tired? I just need to get up. Right. And I was feeling a little less accepting of myself. And, it's like, okay, yeah. And working through the layers of it and getting back to a place of acceptance. I will add, and this idea I love, I got from Sonia Renee Taylor. Brene Brown interviewed her. Sonia Renee Taylor wrote the book, The Body is Not an Apology. Love that book, by the way. If you are a woman who's ever struggled with body image issues, which is pretty much all of Gen X, because like we grew up with diet culture being like actually like thrown down our throats and constant, oh, she's getting a little puffy there, getting a little thick, right? Like all that kind of gross commentary. So like The Body is Not an Apology is a fantastic book. But what I wanted to reference is when Sonia Renee Taylor was talking with Brene about it, Brene was talking about acceptance, and Sonia Renee Taylor said, actually, it's more about self-love. Think about that. It's more about self-love. Sure, there's a level of acceptance that happens, but do we really only want to accept ourselves? Like, okay, that's acceptable. I can accept that. Like, I can accept that that I have ADHD. That's fine. I can accept that. Or do we want to be like, I love myself. I love who I am and how I am. And maybe, I don't love my ADHD every moment of every day, but I do love myself. And when you love yourself, that is different. That is deeper than mere acceptance. And so that is another piece that we work our way towards inside of all of this. And it's a practice. It takes working through the feelings. It takes healing the trauma. It takes noticing our self-talk and leaning in and being curious about the parts of us that are saying those things and what they're trying to accomplish by doing that, and maybe seeing if there's another way, which might first involve healing some of the wounds of why they learned to do that in the first place. So this can be big work, but you can start it just by even noticing, like, what comes up for you. Do you catch yourself shaming yourself or putting yourself down or blaming things on ADHD? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like ADHD doesn't make things extra hard sometimes, and that, certainly like this week, I really had a hard time focusing. Yeah, so I had a less productive week. I think had I regulated my nervous system sooner and just let myself rest sooner, I would have been able to focus sooner. But I had to work through the layers of shame, and there was even like some disgust actually with parts of myself that I had to work through until I could even do that. So this is definitely deeper work, but it's work we can start to do as we pay attention. We build our self-awareness. We build our self-awareness. We notice what's going on inside of ourselves, and we start to hold space for it and get curious and work with it. So, all right, y'all, that was big stuff. I'm glad you're still here if you're still here. And if you're not following already, please follow the Self-Love Woman Way podcast. And be sure to share. Like, I would love it if you would share. I want to help as many women as possible with this. So make sure you're sharing. And I'll keep guests coming on. Like, I'm enjoying this kind of some guests and then a little of me and then guests. But if you have a guest you'd love to have on the show, let me know. You can share in the comments, or you can send me an email at jen@pathways-to-wellness-llc.com, or find me on Instagram at I_am_Jen_Barnes. So an underscore between every single word. I'm kind of finding that funny that my brain did that because it's kind of a pain. But anyway, all right, cool. I hope you have a lovely week wherever you are when you're listening to this, and I hope to catch you next time. Take care.